Now, earlier today, Nigel Dodds confirmed a freeze on domestic and non-domestic rates. But for how long can this freeze be maintained? The Finance Minister joins me now. You're very welcome. This, of course, was something that's been long promised. But is it the right thing to do in the current circumstances to remove your opportunity as an executive to raise funds, perhaps to spend in other areas?
Well, I think that this is a measure which, when you take the overall rates take in Northern Ireland, is approaching £1,000 million. So these measures will save industry and businesses, in terms of freezing the business rates, some £8 million next year. So in the context of the public expenditure position, you're not talking about removing an enormous amount of public expenditure levers in that regard. But what you are doing is providing some respite to businesses at this very, very difficult time. Who are saying, what can the Assembly do? What can the Executive do that's different? And that's one measure, coupled with our decision to freeze or to not proceed with direct route plans on industrial re-rating, which is widely welcome. And what we also did today was to continue the freeze on domestic regional rates as well, which will help hard-pressed families and householders at this difficult time as well.
There was some questioning of the decision, and again it's been well flagged up, to reduce the cap at which domestic rates cease to increase from 500,000 valuation to 400,000. That effectively does benefit those who have big valuable houses. Any reason why they should be benefited?
Well, I think it's fairness. I think in Northern Ireland we shouldn't be paying more. We shouldn't be paying at the absolute maximum of what council taxpayers are paying in England. There was many people who suggested this should come down even further, and we said, no, we've got to balance the revenue against what's fair. But what's fair is that people in Northern Ireland shouldn't be paying more than average, what is the highest council tax band rate in the UK generally. So it's a question of fairness. Now, I've heard this talk today, this pushes then the burden onto middle class ratepayers or others. It doesn't. There will be no effect on any other ratepayers because the regional rate has been frozen for the next 2 years, and even after that we're introducing other measures such as rates on empty properties, which will make up revenue. So this notion that somehow this is about fairness and making sure that people in Northern Ireland are treated fairly, because we know that there are many people who might live in a big house but they don't have particularly a lot of money or cash or assets. And what we're doing is ensuring that we deal with that problem. We've also introduced compensation measures for local councils so they don't suffer, but it won't transfer any burden onto middle class ratepayers or working class ratepayers or any other ratepayers for that matter.
Within the last fortnight or so, Victor Hewitt, with his report for the Economic Research Centre in Northern Ireland, suggested that you might have to look again both at this policy of keeping a rates freeze on and also at some of the other high-profile policies of the Executive, such as free prescription charges, free transport for the elderly. I think essentially his argument was that the realities of the credit crunch meant that you might have to revisit this in order to balance your books.
Well, I've heard some of this talk, and I have to say that as far as the Assembly and the Executive is concerned, we are in the business of making sure that every pound that's delivered here in Northern Ireland produces value for money, and at the same time helping people through a difficult time at the present time. Now, for instance, some of these measures, there's no question of retracing our steps on free transport for the elderly. That's in, and that will remain and stay. Those are policies that we're committed to. And I think it's wrong to frighten people that some of these measures that were just recently introduced are going to be taken away. Because, for instance, take free transport for the elderly. What we did costs about £12 million a year. Overall in Northern Ireland, there's £16,000 million a year being spent. So this is a relatively small amount of money, making a big difference to elderly folk and senior citizens' ability to get out and about in the community, and has been widely welcomed right across the board. Now, of course, as far as the public expenditure position, don't lose sight of the fact that the real threat here is not what we're doing. The real threat is coming from Whitehall in terms of these efficiency cuts in 2010-11, supported by the Labour Party and by the Conservative and Unionist Party. So those are the issues that we have to grapple with as we move forward, and we're already engaged in that.
But does it make your own discussions, I think you're due in Edinburgh on March the 12th to discuss this with finance ministers from the devolved administrations, does it make your discussions any more difficult there if you're saying, look, we can't make savings, and they say, well, look, you're freezing your rates, you should be raising more revenue locally?
No, I've heard, look, first of all, we don't allow the Treasury or others to set our policies. That's what devolution's all about, and the Treasury don't seek to interfere in that, and it would be completely wrong if they did. And when I met Scottish and Welsh finance ministers recently, What was very interesting was, and this next meeting that you referred to is a follow-up to that with the Chief Secretary, what was very interesting was the commonality of approach that there was between the three devolved administrations in our approach, in that all of us were looking at ways to reduce the burden, both in terms of red tape and local taxation and so on local businesses and householders. So the idea that somehow, Northern Ireland's out of step, we're very much in line with what's happening elsewhere. And I think, for instance, some of the things we're doing that doesn't necessarily cost any more money, such as making sure that bills that come in are paid out as quickly as possible so that businesses have cash flow, putting pressure on our banks, and we've been hearing a bit about that earlier today as well. All of these things are things that we can do. It doesn't necessarily cost money, but the things that we are doing in terms of some of the measures are replicated elsewhere as well.
You mentioned the efficiency drive from Whitehall. It's been reported that it could be looking for about 200 million back from Northern Ireland now. Alex Salmond in Scotland said that if it's 500 million for Scotland, that could equate to 8,700 job losses. Are we looking at thousands of job losses here?
Well, I'm not prepared to concede anything in terms of what Whitehall are looking for in terms of these so-called efficiencies, because let's get it clear, nobody's against efficiency in government or spending. I mean, already the programme for government and the executive has a programme for efficiencies, but that should be about doing what we're doing at less cost and putting the money that we save back into frontline services. What this is about in Whitehall is saying we're just going to take that money out of the block. They don't even give it to you to do other things with. The figures that are being bandied about, we won't know the precise details until the budget itself that Alistair Darling is going to give in April, and then we'll see what it is across Whitehall and the devolved legislatures.
But Northern Ireland can't escape. If Scotland and Wales have to pay their share, so do we.
Well, I mean, I hear what's been said about that. I don't take it just sort of, well, that's it, there's nothing we can do about it. That's the business of politics. Of course, we recognise the difficulties they're in. I mean, we know that the Labour Party and government are actually, being urged to go even further in terms of cuts by the opposition and the Conservatives who are saying, bring it in from April 2009 and go further. So we are into the difficulty there when you've got actually one of your own parties here urging the government to go even further in terms of what they're doing. But the fact of the matter is that we believe in Northern Ireland very clearly that we're in a different position from the rest of the devolved administrations, in that at the time that devolution was set up, we were told, here's the settlement, here's the financial position, here's the money that you have. We have implemented efficiencies already, and therefore it would be completely wrong, and going back on the word of both Gordon Brown and the then Prime Minister, to now interfere with that settlement.
Okay. Nigel Dodds, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.